Well, it's another day in the AAA gaming industry. That means it's another day for studio closure. This time around, it's Bluepoint Games. The renowned studio known for some of the most high-quality remasters, collections, and remakes out there has had a tumultuous last few years under PlayStation ownership. Unfortunately, the chance to turn things back around will never come, as on February 19th, 2026, it was announced Sony would be shutting down Bluepoint. When you consider the state of the studio before its acquisition, and the kinds of games they made, it has to be one of the most baffling fumblings of talent I've ever seen. And it very much calls into question the dependability of the current leadership at PlayStation Studios. Bluepoint Games was founded in 2006 by former members of Retro Studios after their work with Nintendo on Metroid Prime. The young team would quickly find a new partner in their ex-rival PlayStation, collaborating with them to create Blast Factor, one of the very first games to be a PlayStation Network exclusive following the launch of that service. Blast Factor would end up being their first and only original game, as they eventually found a different calling. In 2009, Sony tasked Bluepoint with creating the God of War collection on PlayStation 3. Featuring remastered ports of God of War 1 and 2, Bluepoint absolutely nailed it. The collection received widespread critical acclaim, praised for its enhanced visuals and improved frame rates. Many deemed this collection as the definitive way to play these classic games, and a great option for PlayStation 3 players looking to catch up on the saga before the then upcoming God of War 3. Following this great success, Bluepoint became Sony's go-to studio for ports and collections, including the Ico and Shadow of the Colossus collection, Uncharted the Nathan Drake collection, and Gravity Rush Remastered. A few years later, Bluepoint would take the next step and develop a full-on remake as opposed to just a remaster with Shadow of the Colossus for PlayStation 4. And once again, the team was ready for the challenge. They remade the visuals of the PS2 masterpiece from the ground up, making it look more beautiful than ever without losing the essence of what made the original so impactful. That's what I personally really admired about Bluepoint as a studio. I think a lot of people look at remasters or remakes and see them as something easy that can just be tossed together for some quick cash. And I suppose in some instances they can be, but Bluepoint's games were never like that. They always found a way to make tangible improvements on the original products without straying too far from their initial visions. It's extremely impressive to take so many different games and successfully fit into their unique mold each time. In 2020, Bluepoint had another remake ready for the launch of PlayStation 5, this time with Demon's Souls. Once again, their game was met with unanimous praise, and despite being a launch title, remains one of the most visually stunning games of the PlayStation 5 generation to this day. As we reached the end of 2020, Bluepoint was now seen as the premier studio for video game remakes, and it seemed Sony felt the same, because in September 2021, they tied the knot on their partnership that had lasted nearly 15 years, officially acquiring Bluepoint into PlayStation Studios. Fans were thrilled by this announcement and ran wild with the possibilities of what games could be remade next. But suddenly, Bluepoint disappeared. In the immediate years following the studio's acquisition, we didn't hear much of anything from them. Reports indicated the team was looking to evolve into creating original content, a claim many assumed would entail new installments of existing IPs. But as the years ticked by, their original content was still nowhere to be found. The mystery of Bluepoint's project would remain just that, all the way until 2025, when we got news worse than any of us could have possibly imagined. While Bluepoint was toiling away at their unknown game, PlayStation at large had begun a major push into the live service genre, attempting to find their crown jewel. As many of you know, this initiative has not gone the way they planned, something I've covered in many prior videos. Following the massive failure of Concord, PlayStation reevaluated their current portfolio of games and began widespread cancellations across their development teams. In January 2025, PlayStation announced the cancellation of 2 games in particular. The first was the live service game at Bend Studio, something fans had already known was in development for quite some time. But the other canceled game was a shock. and one that still sends shivers down my spine. It was revealed Bluepoint had been working on a live service game, more specifically, a God of War live service game, which had now been cancelled. I can vividly remember how quickly my heart sank when I read this news. PlayStation had wasted a lot of time, money, and resources on these live service games, but giving one to Bluepoint of all people was the most offensive waste yet. This is a studio with literally no experience in the space, and no indication that they had any of the skills necessary to create a game like that. Not to mention, a God of War live service game sounds stupid in the first place. It was hard to accept the fact that Bluepoint had spent years on a project like this, instead of reviving one of the many PlayStation IPs we had dreamed would return. And with the team now having to start all over, it was likely going to be years before we saw anything from them. But hey, at least PlayStation recognized their mistake, and now the team can get back to doing what they do best. Or at least, that's what I would be saying if we didn't live in the worst timeline imaginable. On February 19th, 2026, Bloomberg's Jason Schreier reported that Bluepoint Games was being shut down by PlayStation. The announcement sent shockwaves through the community, and I feel like I'm still processing it myself. I'm left with overwhelming frustration because it's the culmination of a problem I pointed to in a video a few months back titled The Mismanagement of PlayStation. PlayStation's first party was once their strongest asset, the feature that helped them rise above their main competitor Xbox and regain the home console market. Their iconic lineage of characters and frequent output of high-quality exclusive games are what made me fall in love with the brand in the first place. But at the moment, I cannot say that I trust current leadership to continue keeping that history alive. I can't stress to you enough how simple and easy running a studio like Bluepoint Games should have been. The fact that a bunch of people getting paid millions of dollars found a way to mess it up is unironically impressive. I could have done a better job managing Bluepoint. You out there watching this video could have done a better job as well. You know why? Because here's how it would have gone. You walk into their studio, slap 5 games down and say, which one do you want to remake? Okay, sounds good, see you in 3 years. 3 years later, you come back and toss 5 more games down and say, which one do you want to make a collection for? Great, be back in 2 years. And then you just repeat that cycle forever. That's all this ever should have been. And let me be clear about something. Describing Bluepoint's games as easy or simple to manage is not meant to detract from their quality or value. In fact, if Bluepoint had been used correctly, I believe they could have become one of PlayStation's most important teams. And here's why I say that. We all know games take longer than ever to make. PlayStation's premier developers like Naughty Dog, Santa Monica, Guerrilla, or Sucker Punch get heard from about twice a decade at this point. Their only studio that has had any consistent output is Insomniac, and even then, the time between their games has started to increase. What Bluepoint could have been, and should have been, was that bridge in between. Remakes and collections that could fill in the gaps when other first-party titles weren't ready. A relatively quick, efficient way to get some releases on the calendar, keep fans excited, and help create a feeling that there was always something new coming out. Instead, Bluepoint was mismanaged to the point of not releasing a single video game for nearly 6 years. How in the world is that possible? Most are pinning the blame on the head of PlayStation Studios, Herman Holst. And trust me, we'll get to him in a minute. But first, I want to acknowledge that this wasn't a one-man mistake. Co-founder and president of Bluepoint, Marco Thrush, seemed determined to begin creating original games. His statements to IGN on the day Bluepoint was acquired fully focused on this idea. And while I understand the creative allure of that endeavor, you have a responsibility as studio head to do what's best for your employees. Being the go-to team tasked with every PlayStation remake is an extremely solid and stable gig in what has become a very unstable industry. Pushing so hard to create something original when your entire brand has been built on remasters and remakes never made much sense to me. In the end, that misguided effort led to their demise. What angers me the most is that Thrush no doubt walks away from Bluepoint with a decent chunk of change from the Sony acquisition, while many of his employees have been tossed into an awful job market with nothing to show for it. It was no doubt a massive mistake to push the team in this direction, but in some ways I can understand his perspective. It's natural as developers to want to make something that is your own, and a successful original project could allow the team to scale up and become even more prestigious. But this is the moment where PlayStation leadership, specifically Hermen Hulst, dropped the ball. They should have stepped in. Hermen failed Bluepoint by allowing them to stray so far from what they were known for. He never should have allowed them to go down a path of creating original content, much less a damn live service game. In my humble opinion, it raises into question Hermen's understanding of the industry or his teams, and his ability to lead PlayStation Studios. Listen, projects fail all the time. There are games canceled every single day that none of us will ever even know about. It's part of game development, and sometimes those risky big swings are what is needed to create something truly special. I totally acknowledge that. But when I see a project like the God of War live service game, it really makes me wonder if these executives are currently living on the same planet as us. If I sat down 100 PlayStation fans in 2022 and asked them if they wanted Bluepoint Games to make a God of War multiplayer game, every single one of them would have looked at me like I was crazy and say no. How is it then that a guy like Hermen Hulst can't come to the same conclusion? And how is it that Hermen gets to sit on his throne while he shuts down studio after studio who failed due to the games that he himself allowed to be greenlit, made, or released? The buck stops with him, and he has failed. Hulst's email to staff about the Bluepoint decision that was obtained by Kotaku has me even more riled up. In his statement, he says, and I quote, "We're operating in an increasingly challenging industry environment. Rising development costs, slowed industry growth, changing player behavior, and broader economic headwinds are making it harder to build games sustainably. We've taken a close look at our business to ensure we're delivering today while still well positioned for the future. As a result, we will be closing Bluepoint Games in March." What a spineless and utterly useless statement. Bluepoint did not fail because of changing player behavior. They did not fail because development costs are rising. They failed because you allowed them to make a game they were not equipped to make. The biggest irony of all is that I would argue a studio like Bluepoint might be your team in the best position to fight back against these negative industry trends. Remaking a game is a lot quicker and cheaper than building something from scratch, is it not? Would that not make them the perfect team to keep around during a difficult stretch of time in the industry? As you can obviously tell, I am officially at my breaking point with Hermen Hulst. Since becoming head of PlayStation Studios, he has shown me nothing. Every great game they've had was either already in development before he had that role, or is a sequel to a game that was created before he had that role. You cannot point to a single meaningful positive thing he has directly attributed to PlayStation Studios in the last 5 years. I am tired of seeing him skirt accountability while everyone below him suffers the consequences. Here are some simple facts. Under Hermen Hulst, we are getting less games from PlayStation than ever before. Under Hermen Hulst, studios are getting closed yearly. And under Hermen Hulst, there's a very real chance that multiple PlayStation first-party teams will go the entire PS5 lifecycle without releasing a single video game. Yes, game development takes longer than it used to, and yes, the market has changed. But your job is to figure that out. You don't get paid to throw your hands up and say, oh well, what can I do? You are the leader of PlayStation Studios. Everything going wrong right now falls on you and your poor management. So let me end by saying this. Hermen and PlayStation are very lucky this generation has gone the way it has. If Xbox was even somewhat pretending to be slightly competitive instead of just giving up and porting everything to PS5, they could have been in some trouble. But instead, they've coasted by as the only serious contender in the traditional home console space. While that may be working for them right now, it's not going to work forever. It's time to get it together and get it together quickly. In order to do that, it starts with changes at the top. As I read back everything I just wrote, I'm genuinely still astounded by this whole situation. If you had told me back in 2021 that Bluepoint would never release a game under PlayStation Studios ownership, I would have laughed in your face. It was an outcome that seemed literally impossible. What's even more bizarre about this closure is that it comes just a week after the announcement of the God of War Trilogy remake, which is apparently being done by Santa Monica themselves. Wow, what a great use of first-party resources. If only Sony had a dedicated remake studio who could take the weight off Santa Monica so they can focus on their other game that's already been in development for half a decade, Herman should really look into getting one of those. Jokes aside, it is a truly depressing end to what was once a great studio, and I sincerely hope all of the talented people affected by the poor decisions of their leadership can land on their feet. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go stare at a wall and imagine all the great Bluepoint remakes and collections I could have been playing.